experts to help us understand exactly what we need to do. So thank you all so much for being here. And I want to start off by asking if you both can help our audience understand the current legal distinctions between migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Often these terms are just thrown around, but people need to understand how these classifications affect someone's rights and protections. So Sharon, if you could start us off.
Migrant is not a legal term. Migrant refers to somebody who's coming here from another country, wherever that country is. Two legal terms, refugee and asylee. Refugee and asylee have the same definition. It's just that a refugee is applying for refugee status outside the U.S., whereas an asylee is applying from within the U.S. with his or her feet on the ground here. And the definition is somebody who is unwilling or unable to return to their country of origin based on a well-founded fear of persecution based on either their race, their nationality, their religion, political opinion, or being in a particular social group. And a particular social group is a legal term of art, which is very complicated even for practitioners to define. And in fact, my colleague Alina stayed up all night briefing the issue. But basically, it's being a part of a somewhat distinct group that is targeted by the majority of the population. So nowadays, we are often using that group to help people who have sexual orientation that's different than the majority, and then some different ethnic groups in different parts of the world.
Alina?
There is a really good video that came out like yesterday or the day before, Wired tech support. Mm-hmm. Well, a fantastic immigration lawyer who I've not met in person but sort of come across in the social media circles did an immigration tech support thing on Wired, and it's great. And he goes through this definition and a lot more things that may or may not come up today. Mm-hmm. But I totally encourage you to check that out. And one very important thing about what Sharon said is often in the context of a refugee or someone who is seeking asylum, it's not what happened to you that's really important or what will happen to you, it's why. The why is in many cases more important than the what.
Yeah, well said, well said. So when someone approaches a church or community organization seeking help with immigration issues, what do y'all think should be the first steps, and when is it essential to involve legal professionals?
So I can start with that. I think it's pretty clear in the law at this point that if you are a church and you are providing services such as food, like soup kitchen, financial assistance for medical care, legal services, that's all okay. Counseling services. I think in the next part of the question is when do you, involve your lawyer? When do you go and talk to your lawyer? And I think, it's really pretty far down the road that you need to talk to your lawyer. But I think, there are a couple of pitfalls here, and there is a federal statute that does criminalize assisting undocumented individuals. And I think you want to kind of have that in the back of your mind. So, one thing that's clearly, something to stay away from is, bringing people here from another country in an undocumented status. Now, I don't think anybody out here is going to be doing that unless they're, using the immigration laws to bring people here under a specific immigration category. But if you are, if somebody is here and you're thinking about housing people in your church or in assisted housing that you're going to be providing, I think that's maybe when you want to talk to legal counsel, because what you want to avoid is the definition of harboring. And so you cannot be housing people in such a manner as to prevent their detection by the law enforcement authorities. No matter how you and I think that that is just key here and would love to do it, I think that that's what Jesus calls us to do, God calls us to do. U.S. law, this particular statute that I'm talking about, does require, that you stay away from harboring, and so I do think, that's something you want to talk to a lawyer about. And then the other pitfall that, I would urge you to pay attention to with respect to this statute again is if there's transportation involved in your program, and I think most transportation of undocumented folks is going to be perfectly fine. Occasionally I do transport my folks to the immigration court. Yes, I am transporting an undocumented person, but I'm not doing that. Or arguably, I'm not doing that with the intent to further their undocumented status. I'm bringing them to the court to hopefully obtain permission to stay here. And so I think, those are two concepts that, if your program triggers either of those, either the harboring, or the transportation, I do think that's probably a time to call your immigration lawyer and just make sure that you're doing things in a way that protects you in your program and protects the undocumented folks too that you're trying to help.
Absolutely. Anthony, Alina?
Yeah, this area sounds like a minefield, and it sounds really complicated.
Right.
And it is. But I don't want that to discourage you from helping this community. And I really don't think it should. Great thing to do would be for your faith community to have a relationship with a lawyer whom you can contact and ask. I do serve in that sort of position for a lot of faith-based communities in the Richmond area, because just like Sharon was saying, yeah, transportation's a toughie. But people need to get to court.
Mm-hmm.
People need to get to church.
Right.
People need to get to things that we usually consider like constitutionally protected, right? So going to court, you have to have access to the courts. That's fundamental due process. Church, your First Amendment right to, but it can get a little complicated, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. That just means you should, have a new best friend who's a lawyer that you feed really great biscuits.
That's right. That's the key. That's the key, everyone.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Do it, and yeah, just I'm here in the capacity of a lawyer and wanting to advise, but yes, exactly.
Now, you just brought up the First Amendment, and I wanted to ask as a follow-up question, because I think part of the confusion about immigration for a lot of people is that they don't understand how the Bill of Rights applies to undocumented people. Could you all speak a bit about that as well?
Some irony for you. Arguably, the Bill of Rights applies more to undocumented people than it does to indigenous folks living on Indian reservations.
Whoa.
Yeah, think about that for a second. Because with regard to all of the rights that indigenous folks have on their Indian reservations, that's complicated. I once defended a person who, I once defended someone for murder back in Nevada who was lived his entire life on an Indian reservation, and this is when I was a really young lawyer, and you don't necessarily have the right to a court-appointed attorney in all tribal courts.
Okay.
But if you're an undocumented person going to any U.S. court, you do.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant. Like, it's kind of hard to really digest that, but it's true. So, the Bill of Rights applies to every person who is undocumented, except for the one thing that they cannot do that is in the Bill of Rights, is carry a firearm.
Okay.
So, somehow there are dispossession statutes that most states have, and there's also a federal dispossession statute. That, and I hate to use the A word, but alien in possession of a firearm
Right.
is a thing. But aside from that, all of the Bill of Rights apply to undocumented citizens. Undocumented citizens, I mean, they're citizens of our community, citizens of the world.
Gotcha.
Agree with everything Alina's saying. I guess just to give some perspective, if somebody is in removal proceedings, the interpretation of those rights, or the application of those rights, is going to be very, very different than the application of those rights in federal court, state court. For instance, in state court and federal court, you have Fourth Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment protections against unlawful search and seizure. While, yes, you do have that right in immigration court when the court is deciding whether to eject you from this country, you don't, let's say evidence was seized in an unlawful way, and we all know what ICE is doing these days, and the deceptive tactics that they're using. It is unlikely that you will be able to exclude that evidence as you could in state or federal court. There has to be an outrageously egregious violation of your Fourth Amendment right against unlawful search and seizure, and that's an incredibly difficult standard to meet. So I would just add that in removal proceedings, and distinct from state and federal court, your rights are not applied as vigorously as they are in regular state and state court.
Absolutely. I think about just all of the ways that this season has to be very traumatizing and anxiety-inducing for undocumented people. Thinking about like beginning of the school year, thinking about folks who live with chronic illnesses who need to have medical attention, all of the different ways that leaving your house, going to the market would be anxiety-inducing. And I would love to hear your perspective on the biggest legal barriers that migrants face when just accessing basic services, healthcare, education, employment, and how can communities help undocumented folks navigate these challenges?
So this era of ours is just, well, as everybody knows, unprecedented and terrifying. Used to be that the biggest hurdles were, transportation. Our clients can't get driver's licenses for the most part, and so, how are they going to get to immigration court? How are they going to get to the doctor? Uber, but they don't have money. Language access. That used to be that was an overwhelming obstacle. Lack of financial resources, again, overwhelming. But now all of that is just like not even the issue anymore. I mean, it is the issue, but the issue is people are terrified to go outside of their homes. I'm really and truly, and I'm sure Alina is encountering this, people are not leaving their homes to go to the convenience store because they know ICE is waiting. It is unreal. I never thought I'd be living in a country like this. That's the issue now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sharon's point about transportation was huge because technically speaking, you're more likely to be snatched as a non-citizen on your way to somewhere, like usually walking to your car or getting pulled over, than you are in the place. So school itself, I can definitely say this within the city of Richmond, I can definitively say that children, non-citizen children, are safer in schools in the city of Richmond than they are almost anywhere.
Wow.
But the danger points are at the time from when you leave your apartment with dad and dad's driving you to school.
Right.
Or dad's picking you up from school, and you're driving from school. So this is the good kind of time for, if you are a community that is interested in providing some help to some non-citizens, it would be good to consult with an attorney about how you can help with those weak points to things that are, what we refer to as constitutionally protected. Like, children have the right to go to school pursuant to a case called Plyer versus Doe, which is still good law for the moment in the United States. People have the right to go to church, medical care. There are arguments for substantive due process with regard to access to that, to being able to go there. So I think that is probably the most traumatic thing. That's why, as Sharon said, people just aren't leaving their homes. I mean, my office is literally inside a church.
Yeah.
And I think that helps a little bit, maybe. But, I've heard people say that to me, but it's really hard to feel, I would imagine it's really hard for folks to feel safe anywhere.
Yeah.
I just want to add, I think that's a great way to argue. Just thinking about the transportation issue. When you're structuring your program as a church, if you are interfering with somebody's constitutionally protected right, like education, I think that's a great way to build up your protection as a church for providing transportation.
Yeah, great point. That kind of lends me to my next question. Like, can you share examples of successful community-based programs that provide legal support or advocacy for migrants?
I would love to, but I know that ICE is probably watching, so I'm going to decline.
Understood.
But if you would like to reach out to me personally, I hope that somewhere in this program is my email or whatnot, and I would love to discuss that. There are, in these programs, let me say for, the DHS that may be watching me right now, I'm not disclosing these because they're not legal. They are perfectly legal. I just know that given all the rhetoric that we've been hearing over the last 72 hours, I just don't want to invite, thunderous attacks from afar to any of these fantastic groups that are doing work that are organized around faith and that are absolutely, perfectly, 100% legal. I just don't want to bring any attention to them right now.
Understood.
I'll talk about a past example. When I was at Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, I worked with Pastor Laura Elliott, who was very involved in the Methodist denomination. And really it was her, she was the main impetus behind the program. We arranged a clinic for Haitians who had recently gotten here. So I want to say this was like 2023. And these folks, while a lot of them were eligible for TPS, to the extent that they wanted to stay here permanently, they would need to file asylum claims. And many of them were living in rural North Carolina. Of course, you had the language issue, you had you had the transportation issue, the lack of resources issue. And so between the different groups in the Methodist Church out there in rural North Carolina and Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, we were able to structure a clinic. It was one day, and we were able to serve about, I believe 30 people. Pastor Elliott arranged for the transportation with all the people at different Methodist churches out in Western North Carolina. Got people on site to CCLA. They brought the translators in because while we all spoke Spanish, we did not have any ability to speak Creole, Haitian Creole. So, translators were brought in, transportation was facilitated, CCLA kicked in food for volunteers, and we were able to file, I can't remember the number, but I think it was somewhere around 20 asylum applications for free for those individuals. And when you file an asylum application for somebody, you not only give them the access to changing their status here permanently, but in the interim, you give them the ability to get a work authorization, 6 months after filing, and that's really important in immigration law because immigration law takes forever. I mean, we have people waiting to have their asylum adjudicated, 10 years, down the road from the filing of the application. So I think that was an incredible, interaction program between the Methodist Church and CCLA. Also, I do want to speak to one more program, and it's not existent at this point, or to my knowledge, of the Charlotte Immigration Court, but it used to be existent. And I'm just throwing this out there because I think I'd like to see it happen, develop in courts again. It's called Court Watch, and you enlist people, volunteers, who are willing to come to immigration court and essentially take notes and observe some of the crazy, that goes on, in those courts. And I think having a record is so important. And so I'm hoping, and that did happen in multiple jurisdictions all over the country. It wasn't just the Charlotte Immigration Court, but we really need that to happen. And I mean, like and I'm not making this up. This was actually publicized in the press. We had, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, and we had a judge who actually was promoted to the Bureau of Immigration, to the BIA, but he had a child, crying in court, because, that's what 3-year-olds, 2 or 3-year-olds do, and he was in removal proceedings. It wasn't like mom could have left him home. Like, he was being charged with being removable from the U.S. So he was there, and the judge said, I have a dog back in my office, and and I'm not afraid to use him. And people heard it, and Court Watch person made a note and of this incident, and actually CCLA took some action. Nothing happened. Like I said, the guy was removed from the Charlotte Immigration Court. However, he was promoted. But like stuff like that, it happens. And so I think the more we can get the word out to people by having volunteers sit in immigration court and take notes, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta let that moment breathe. That's man. And I think what you just said is probably why I've encountered so many different communities, like faith communities, who feel the sort of overwhelm that prevents you from even knowing where and how to start. And it just feels like there's so many different tentacles on this problem. It's like I don't know how to help, and just, I just feel overwhelmed. And so what would you all want church leaders and community members to prioritize if they want to build more effective, legally sound support systems for migrants in their area? Like, where can they start, knowing that they want to do something but just don't know how?
Basics like safety, food, the basic needs that we all have, whether we're in immigration court or in some other kind of crisis, right? Because that's not something I can do. Another thing that I have relied on community and faith-based support for, in addition to issues like housing crises, food crises, are issues regarding intimate partner violence, child care. Sometimes people have a hard time finding jobs and earning money to sustain themselves during their process because they have small children. This particularly affects women. My sort of subset area of expertise in immigration is domestic violence-based immigration, which the Attorney General tried to take away a few weeks ago. We'll see how that works, but anyway. So a lot of these women have trouble even going to work because they might have small children at home, or they stay in very, very violent relationships because they don't have anyone to watch small children if they go out and, if they go out into the workplace and try to earn some money. So I have greatly relied on folks, particularly, the old retired folks with like mental health backgrounds.
Right.
Those, I love them. So anyone who's willing to support with those more basic needs is fantastic. And of course, the overarching elephant in the room is money, but that aside, these basic things that we all need as humans, that's great. It's a great place to start.
No, well said. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. There's so many obstacles, and churches can help out with those basic needs. I do also think that Chris and I were talking about this before the meeting started. Editorials, we need to change the narrative. The right has claimed God and Jesus, and we need to change the narrative. God, in the Bible, welcomes strangers. As you all know, much better than I do. God is love. God isn't, the New Testament, let's banish everybody that doesn't agree with us. I'm sorry, I'm not a theologian, but I guess I'm going to stop there because I'm not a theologian and I don't know a whole lot, but just change the narrative, speak, editorials. I'm going to try to do more of that myself. And then, the other thing I would add to that, because I think Alina's answer is great and complete, I would also say be a good listener. And I know it's hard because a lot of folks don't speak Spanish, and a lot of the immigrants here only speak Spanish. But I think being there for somebody really means a lot. I find that in my practice now. I am called on to listen, and sometimes I'm not able to do a whole lot other than listen. I had a WhatsApp meeting with a client yesterday, and because of the transportation issue, she's not coming to my office. I'm doing this on WhatsApp. And this client who, faced a very traumatic incident in Mexico where she comes from, her asylum claim, because of legal reasons, is not that strong, and I have to tell her that as she weighs her options. Her hearing is coming up, and find a way forward for her. And frankly, there's really not a whole lot of ways forward for her. My goal for her, I want her to avoid detention, and one way to do that is to ask for voluntary departure. But I will tell you that our government is so cruel now that they are not even agreeing to allow somebody to do voluntary departure, to avoid detention by getting her passport in shape and getting some money and going back to her home country. Our government is so cruel, ICE, that they're not agreeing to that, and that person will get an order, or at least in Charlotte, and that person will be detained before she's allowed back home. She's got a 3-year-old, that's really not a good place to be if you've got a 3-year-old. So anyways, I say this, she cried. We were on the phone on the WhatsApp for about 30 minutes, and I felt like my role in that call was just really to listen. I can't imagine being in that situation, And so, and I feel like if everybody can do that, then I think the value of that is really immense. And I was glad, even though it was hard, I was glad I did that. It wasn't really a lawyer job, it was a person job, human being job.
Right. Which I love that you lift up, because that seems to be like the ingredient that's missing in the cultural conversation right now, is the humanity aspect of, without regard to title, like there's a call for just, compassion doesn't have to be something only churches or faith-based communities perform. Like, people who have no religious background whatsoever can still exercise compassion, and that seems to have removed from the algorithm and removed from the equation in a very consequential way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think are some common misconceptions about what community members can and cannot do to help migrants legally? I say that because we're in an age of such great misinformation and disinformation. So there's all sorts of things that people say, oh, you can't do this, or I heard or I saw on social media platform of your choosing that you can't do that. What are some misconceptions you all come across often from just community members who either want to help or trying to be obstacles in the help?
Can you give me some examples of what you've been hearing? Because I think my algorithm's in a different space than yours.
That's fair. And my algorithms, I try to refresh it and just do a cleansing of the palette. But I'm just thinking of some of the things that we've already talked about before, where you're talking about whether it's I forget the legal term that you said, like basically like keeping someone harboring, right? Like, so I think things around like harboring, and there's a lot of like imagery that pulls back to like other moments in history where you've had to like harbor folks from the government, and just thinking about ways that people can sort of like stand in the gap and like prevent activity that would be harmful. So I think that's been sort of the main arena I've heard people like say a lot confidently, but I'm not so sure it's like actually legally wise or even just a good strategy.
That's it's a really good thing to bring up now, because that's complicated. And that it's complicated, but it shouldn't be, because if we lived in a society where the rule of law was followed in the immigration space, I would be able to answer that question with ease and confidence, because
Right.
I know what the law is.
Right.
And we're not following the law, and that's a problem. So, in the past, during Trump 1, hopefully some of you folks online might remember, if you are Presbyterians from the Virginia area, I might have come to speak to your church about just this question, because we knew what the law was. But the thing is, what I would tell people back then was, could some rogue ICE officer, FBI agent try to charge you with something? Sure. But would it stick? Nah. They wouldn't go forward with charges because the Department of Justice doesn't like to lose cases. Yeah, that's not true anymore. So it's hard. For the moment, I think, and this is good as of today, I don't know what's going to be good law or reasonable as of tomorrow. But for the moment, I can say it is not a good idea to take someone to work. That is a bad idea. It is a good idea to take someone to see their lawyer, to take someone to a check-in with ICE, or to take someone to immigration court. That is a good idea. It's a great idea to even accompany them inside. It is a good idea, I think. This is a little gray. Right now, I don't think there's a problem with taking children to school. I think that's fine. because children have a constitutional right to attend school. It is fine to take someone to a doctor's appointment or to take, I think, a child to any sort of school-related activities. I think a good place to stay away from is anything related to illegal employment. When I say by taking someone to work, I want to make that, I should have really given a caveat to that. Many of our non-documented folks in our communities have work authorization, and it is fine to take someone to work when they have work authorization. That is absolutely fine, that's encouraged, that's great. I'm talking about people who don't have work authorization. Not a great idea to give them a ride to work, okay? And now that's pretty much all like the more black and white things I can say.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is just so gray because things are being warped and misinterpreted and weaponized in ways that are just very unconventional and inconceivable.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think let me address the concept of misinformation or misconceptions slightly differently, because I think, Alina's answer is pretty complete in terms of, informing you all, what you can do or what you should focus on. But I think in order to empower you in changing the narrative in your communities, what Alina said about the current functioning of the immigration system is exactly on point. It used to be that, reason and common sense would ultimately prevail because you had a Justice Department that was interested in the due process of law. That's out the window. Bye-bye. It's not here anymore. And the government, the ICE official that, did something outrageous, it would have been considered outrageous 5 years ago. That's no longer considered outrageous because there's nobody to appeal to challenge that person's conduct. And so, I think, making sure that the public understands that it is a misconception that, we are applying the immigration laws in a fair way, that if somebody just comes here, and follows the right steps, they can get status here. It's these people's fault. They didn't follow the rules, and so we are perfectly justified to boot them out. And many of the people that we are booting out now, they actually did follow. They followed all the rules. They applied for humanitarian parole. They applied for TPS. They got documents exactly the right way. It's our government that has, rescinded their status before, the end of that status was promised to them. So they, a lot of these folks are now without status. And well, I guess I don't want to belabor the point, but yeah, these are people that are following the rules, and so we don't have the right to just kick them out.
Yeah, I hear that. I do think a lot about words that I'm not sure are original from Marian Wright Edelman, but I know that her work often reminds me of the importance of going upstream. And so I think about the sort of social location and access that members of the faith community have, not only in terms of, being on the front lines and being with folks who are living under this duress every day, but having the ear of those who affect policy, having the ear of those who affect legislation. And so I'm just curious to know your perspective on what role faith communities and local organizations can play in broader immigration advocacy and policy change. You spoke about it in terms of sort of this great gray area where we don't know what will be legal next week or 10 minutes from now. But even in this sort of like uncertain time, what role can organizations play in advocacy and policy change?
Well, first off, within your own advocacy, within your own organizations, within your own faith-based groups, you can start by making immigration ministry a fundamental part of how you practice your faith. Because our Supreme Court loves First Amendment stuff.
Yeah.
So the more one incorporates the teachings of the Bible, again, I'm not a theologian either.
All good.
Into definitional portions of how a church practices its faith, that's one way to just help internally. And then externally, I think that visibility of congregations, any faith-based group, with your members of Congress is awesome. Figure out a thing. Get together and figure out one thing, not just immigration as a whole, but figure out a thing that you want to change about immigration, and advocate for that. Because I think if, as Sharon said earlier, if we can just sort of redirect the narrative back to at least what I was taught were our fundamental Christian values of compassion and welcome, then I think that if we can reorient our society, we will get to a much better place.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I like that response, and I think focusing on one goal or one mission, and then and talking about why that's the mission, bringing it back to theology, religion. I think that's the way to go. And I think let's challenge them. I mean, the Supreme Court is making decisions now that are, and we won't talk about that, but let's set up the Supreme Court, the next Supreme Court case, with a program like this, and force them, if they're gonna, rule in a way that's not just, force them to deal with this notion that this is religion. For even if you don't believe that God is compassion, God is love, this is First Amendment protected stuff.
Yeah.
And so if you're not going to be hypocrites, rule in our favor, or rule in favor of the program.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm going to open it up at this time to any questions that you all in the audience may have. And recommend to you that we have this live stream mic. I'm going to get my steps in by meeting here.
I'll see your steps.
Oh.
Thanks. Okay. Is this the one?
Yeah, so we have to speak loud because it's going to go into...
Is this okay? Yeah.
So we speak loud for the-
Okay. First of all, thank you for what you do. I mean, it must feel like you're bailing the Titanic with teaspoons, but thank you for what you do. Secondly, I'd like you to put your utopian glasses on for a second. And you almost touched on this just now. What would it look like if we could balance the legitimate interest of the state in knowing who was here with the compassion and welcoming that you just talked about? What would it look like if it was fixed?
think if we frame it from a position of, instead of let's place the burden on you to show why you should not be deported, maybe the government should have the burden to show why you should. And back in the day, you probably remember this, I wasn't practicing law back then, but in the 90s, that was how things worked. I mean, it was much, much different. So I think if we shift the focus onto the de facto is, okay, if you should stay here because you have family here, because you're rooted here, because you're part of a community, because you're contributing, and then make it on the burden on the other side to say why you shouldn't. I think that would be a good start for a utopia, you know. That's hard to think about because there are so many moving parts to what I think would actually be able to happen. But I think that generationally, if we start teaching our children that splitting people up is not okay, if we start teaching our children that your classmates have a right to their family members and that your classmates are suffering when their family members are being taken away and your classmates are scared. And we start to imprint that on the children with privilege. I think hopefully, maybe in a generation or two, we might have a completely different outlook on this in a way that we're not seeing the grotesque levels of trauma that we are now. Particularly if we talk about how just being cruel is not okay. If we stigmatize cruelty, I think looking at it from that lens will help develop the legal landscape in a manner that is better for all of us.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I like putting the burden on the government to justify expelling you from the country, and agree that that really was the system before. And
Thanks,
we're-
Bill Clinton.
Yeah. I think that's the key to this. Yeah.
I'm just noticing, like, this is more of like the pastoral hat coming on, but just the level of grief that you're both communicating in that policy change, and how something as recent as the 90s feels like centuries ago in terms of practice.
Yeah.
Which, as painful as that is, sorry, I forgot this is the mic I need. Which, as painful as that is, I think also there's a glimmer of hope in it that perhaps this one day will also be a memory. That the current way of affairs and the sort of cruelty that seems so omnipresent currently will one day be a memory, and perhaps the sort of memory that is a cautionary tale rather than something worth lionizing and replicating. Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I missed the early part of your presentation, so I might have missed you talking about this. But what are some things that we can deliberately do to push the system? I've heard many people say that we need to have more clergy that go to sit in immigration courts in places like Charlotte and exert pressure because it disturbs the system and people don't know what to do with us as clergy. I work with the Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice, and we've talked about trying to intervene when they're doing raids in different places, and we don't know quite what the consequence would be, but there is energy behind going to be present in places like that. What is the ability of ICE to enforce anything over American citizens who are, I mean, you know, I don't, do they have any authority to do anything to any of us? So those are two basic questions I want to start with. But I would love to see us make test cases with congregations, with denominational support behind them, to begin to see where the pressure points in the system are. And ultimately, what I'd love to see is, and I appreciate you both with your humility as biblical, you know, not biblical scholars, but you're 100% right. The Bible talks about the need for immigration, or not immigration, to protect those who are ger, those who are aliens, xenos. Consistently in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. Not only does it say that, but this is a far more significant theological concern at the core of our faith than anything you could manufacture about abortion. And if we could push this issue within the church far enough that by violating people's rights around immigration, you are violating a core principle of the Judeo-Christian Islamic faith traditions. I hope that that might become contagious within faith community. So.
I think bearing witness is really important because there will come a time where we will all have to memorialize what we have witnessed. And the reason why that is important is not just for posterity or for the future or for historical reference. It's because that's how things change. Right now, as Sharon said earlier, it is critically difficult to hold an ICE officer to account for fundamentally violating someone's civil liberties. But if we keep videos out in the public space of people who are doing nothing wrong, you know, people who are standing back, not obstructing, just expressing their opinions and then getting arrested or getting brutalized in some way. The more we record this and the more we put it out in the public space, the more of a chance that we have of getting some better laws in the future that will melt ice. So that is one thing that I think that we can do, that the clergy can be involved with. And of course, we all have to recognize what levels of privilege and what levels of risk each of us has, right? So the folks who are white are a lot less likely to be arrested as under suspicion of being a non-citizen in violation of the immigration law, right?
Right.
So those folks need to recognize that and probably be in the front lines of documenting, bearing witness, questioning folks. Now, I am not advocating for any kind of violence against ICE officers. I am not advocating for any kind of physical obstruction. I am advocating for witness, 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 document, 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 question, question, question. Because the more we can document the egregiousness, the more we have a chance of making sure that that doesn't happen. Because even if we do get a new administration, it's going to take a long time to wind down this enormous military-type force that we have.
Right.
A long time. And these folks are going to be lingering for a while, even after we have some reform. So we have to have some laws in place to help out with that. And a lot of these guys and girls, a lot of these people,
Right.
people who become ICE officers, grew up in faith communities. Seeing you might make them question what they are doing. Even if you are not getting through, like even if you don't think you're getting through them at that moment, we can always pray and hope that when they go back home and they're eating dinner with their families, that, you know, that pastor really looked at me today with that really sad eye. Why would he do that? Why why would she do that? Why would they look at me like that? What am I like? And maybe that would help them contemplate and ponder.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to think about ways out when you're so underneath it.
Yeah.
I want to echo what Eric said, and gratitude for what you do and the ways you support people as they navigate their civic rights and their human rights. I have two questions, one that you could decline because it might be in the same line of not exposing, but it's actually about that. Are there ways for people who are not connected with an individual or a community that is undocumented, that we can support them without exposing them? Because this is what I know some people struggle with or wrestle with. So there could be some ways that we may want to point to, or may do it in a personal way later. The other question, what are the legal processes for clergy or church people to go visit people in detention centers? Because as much as there is work to be done here in exposing the dehumanization of undocumented people here, there is also the detention center where there is a need for support and compassion to be shown, and even if we can't control all the narrative, but to show up in the different places where there are wounds and hurt, and also resilience as these individuals continue to see what is next in their lives. Thank you.
Take that on. So, first question, I think an individual can try to do the same thing that a church or a community of individuals would do, which is provide kind of the basics, financial assistance, getting an immigrant and or his family members to the doctor's office, to school, kind of the same things we've been talking about, to church, or his house of worship, whatever that might be. So I think that's very, very constructive and plausible. And I do think, the individual connection, I can't overstate how important I feel that is to some of my clients, maybe even more important than my being a lawyer to them. Just that ear, that compassion, listening with compassion. Your second question, I have to admit some ignorance how to get into a detention facility. I've attended CLEs, continuing legal education, where the presenter has talked about the procedures at the facilities we deal with, which are in Georgia, so it's about 5 hours from Charlotte. What I can say that I remember from those presentations is that it's really particularized to the facilities, and I'd be happy to do some research after this. If there's a particular facility that anybody is contemplating visiting, but I agree with you. I think that's tremendously important. Yeah.
I mean, that could be your one. That could be like your one thing, right? So most of these immigration detention facilities are private facilities or private prisons. Make it that your thing if you want, as your faith-based community. Find out which members of Congress are members of your faith or not, and petition them. Be like, hey, we need to make a law that, access to faith, so that if these private prisons are housing folks on the federal dollar, then these private prisons have to have official policies that provide access to members of the clergy to come and provide some sort of ministry. That seems like something we could sell even to the most conservative of Republicans, because that's part of the core Judeo-Christian Islamic values, right?
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
I have a million questions. I think one thought to throw into the air, because I know, we are self-segregated so often for so many different reasons. And so language barrier is one of those, right? If we're not speaking Spanish, or even a lot of folks who are here don't even speak Spanish, or Spanish is their second language from another indigenous language to central, wherever they're from. But there are many faith communities that do speak Spanish as well, and so that could be a touch point of, as a faith community to a faith community, can we build a relationship here that starts the relationship that can then filter down? So that's just a thought. You can comment on that. I also think, on our side, there's a lot that I have questions about in terms of the conversation with our friends who are conservative, and I have many of them, and they're very much on my mind in this past week because of everything that's been happening with the Charlie Kirk response, and how to dialogue with folks. And I think one of those is dispelling myths. And so you talked a little bit about that, but either if you can signpost to a place that has really good comprehensive understanding of these are the ways that ICE is not following the law. You claim to be the party of rule of law, and here are the ways that they're not following our own laws. And dispelling any myths in terms of the right way to be here, and talking about that a little bit. And then any conversation, right? So much of the narrative is, oh, well, it's justified because if it's an invasion, there are millions of people have been pouring in. And any comment or pushback to kind of that narrative as well. That's a whole TED Talk in and of itself. So if there are resources to signpost to, I'd be very happy to look at those. But any concrete things to be like, this is what you have heard. I say to you, this is what is actually happening. Thank you.
The law requires ICE to have reasonable suspicion before detaining someone. That is the law. That is in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It is also part of our Constitution when we think about it. The real question at the moment in the public space, and not just in the public space, but in legal discourse, is what makes suspicion reasonable. And if we are looking at a good place to look for some arguments about that are well-reasoned, are the lawsuits going on in California about that very issue. Because for a while, ICE was enjoined to follow the law. They had to have an injunction to follow the law. And so that's really what the question becomes down to. And so it's hard to say what is a myth and what is reality, because even the legal scholars, the people who have the authority to decide what reasonable suspicion is, have a very creative definition of what is reasonable. So, a person always has the right to remain silent. That helps at least minimizing the reasonable suspicion. And I think it's hard to really talk about what is myth and what is reality, because we don't have real clarity from the courts yet in the immigration context on what that is. We've got some really good case law from like the 70s that talk about checkpoints, that talk about detention of non-citizens under this reasonable suspicion. But like we're seeing with a lot of our really good Supreme Court precedent from the 70s, it's getting reimagined now. in a way that is unhelpful to many of the people that we are trying to assist. But if you're ever curious and you want to go down a nerd rabbit hole, you can just always peruse the internet and look for 8 CFR section code 287. That's 8 CFR 287. 8 CFR 287 is the part of the Code of Federal Regulations that describes what ICE can and cannot do. So we have that, we have the Immigration and Nationality Act, and then we have the Supreme Court interpreting all of that. But the sort of more black letter stuff, look at 8 CFR 287. It's a long, it's got many subsections. But if you want to nerd out to something, you can nerd out with that.
Duly noted.
You have a crash course on that?
Right. We have time for one more question if anyone else has one. Well, if not, I just want to thank you all for being here. And let's thank our panelists so much. One more time, please. Yeah, I truly appreciate it, for sure.
We're going to have a short break for some coffee in the lobby, and then there's going to be a short closing worship, closing ceremony, and then there will be lunch available. Just grab the go boxes, sandwiches in Holderness by 11:45. Is the worship? Worship is in here.
In this space, yep.